our guest speaker today. She's sending me a little note. Okay, yes. All right, so first of all, I want to start out by doing a little bit of housekeeping and just letting everybody know that today's program will be recorded so that we can send it out to our folks who were not able to join us today, and it will be available for a limited amount of time. We will be going into breakout rooms, and that portion of the program will not be recorded. I'd also like to thank the Women's Leadership Initiative at Albany Law School for their generous ability to sponsor today's program and the previous program that Randy joined us for last fall. And now I would like to introduce Randy Braun, specializing with women. Randy is an executive coach, consultant, speaker, and the founder of Something Major. Absolutely love the name. She is attorneys across big law, public interest, and the government, with an emphasis on optimization over remediation. Randy's corporate clients are leaders in their fields, including Microsoft and the law firms of Cahill, Gordon, and Reindel, and Fried Frank, among others. Without further ado, Randy Braun.
Thank you so much, Mary. And oh, I'm echoing a little. One piece of housekeeping, Mary, I want to confirm we're going to 1:30 today, not 1 o'clock, correct?
That is correct.
Perfect. Just want to make sure. Well, it is just such a pleasure to be back here with you all. Mary, thank you for having me back and spend this time with the students, alumni, faculty, and staff of Albany Law School's Women's Leadership Initiative. Mary just introduced me, and I would love to hear from some of you. If you wouldn't mind throwing in the chat, I'd love to hear where you're joining us from. Are you an alum, a student, a faculty member, a staff member? And I have one question for you, which is, what is your biggest unknown when it comes to networking? What is your biggest unknown? And while we wait for those to come in the spirit of networking and relationship building, I want to share a great piece of advice that I got from my first boss at the Anti-Defamation League. He told me early in my career that learning to do anything was kind of like learning how to fly a plane. It's all about the reps. And here's the thing about training to become a pilot. You need to clock a certain number of hours before they give you your pilot's license. Here's the problem. Often, when it comes time to think about relationship building and networking early in our careers, we know it's important. We've heard that it can lead to our dream job or the mentor that's going to change our life, or maybe even help us build our book of business one day, and yet you have little or no experience with how to do it. The skills feel underdeveloped, the conversations feel transactional, and even though you are genuinely really appreciative for the time and insights that people have shared with you, you're not exactly sure how to meaningfully keep in touch. And that can create some turbulence. And so while these skills can initially be nerve-wracking, this is your captain speaking, and I want to assure you, you are not going to crash and burn. Trust me, I have put in the flying hours for you, including a few botched takeoffs and a few rough landings. To follow up on Mary's introduction, I'm Randy Braun. I'm an executive coach and the founder of Something Major, which is a coaching and consulting firm dedicated to advancing women leaders. As Mary mentioned, I spend my time working with women in high demand, high performance, high unpredictability, high volume environments. That means I spend a lot of time with lawyers, with women in big law, in public interest, in government. And if there is anything that I have seen as one universal across this diverse slate of women I work with, it is that relationships are game changers for them. And here's the best part. It is something that you have control over in your career. And that's why I'm really thrilled to be here today with all of you and with the Albany Law School Women's Leadership Initiative to talk about how you all can grow these skills as the next generation of women leaders in this field. And I just want to double check. Mary, just give me a thumbs up. My screen is showing. You can see the Albany Law School logo on your screen. Excellent. So I'm going to read through your comments in a second, but I just want to do a snap poll here in the chat. On a scale of 1 to 10, how comfortable are you networking? 1 is like, I have no idea what I'm doing and how to do it. 5 is, I get it. It just still kind of feels awkward sometimes. 10 is, please introduce me to a new stranger I can speak to immediately. So let's go ahead on a scale of 1 to 10, and I'm just going to scan some of your answers. How comfortable are you with networking and relationship building? They're related, but two sides of the same coin. Oh, who's a 10? 10, 8.5, 8, 5, 5, 10, 8. Wow, pretty confident group. This is great. So, oh, interesting. We have a question from Uli. Curious about how much is too much, how not to seem too forward, especially when networking remotely where all subtlety is lost. We're going to talk about that today. So we are going to talk about, our learning objectives for today, how we're going to go ahead and clock those flying hours. And let's just talk a little bit about where we're going. And I know that we have a range of people joining us today and a range of people who are going to be watching this, especially our students. I know that today in our live audience, we have quite a few alumni and quite a few staff and faculty members. And I really want to make sure if you are a student who's below a 5 and you're watching this, or you're joining live and you're feeling shy to put that in there because we got so many 10s and 8s in the house, there really is something here for everybody. And I really want to make sure that you walk away feeling like you're a little bit more solid on the basics. And then for those of you who are, stepping up to get your black belt, I'm sure you'll learn something new here, and I can't wait to hear some of your experiences. So with that in mind, let's talk about where we're going to go. We're going to chart our flight path and talk about the importance of connecting networking and relationship building to our goals. We're going to talk about the mechanics of flying the plane itself, like to Uli's question, how much is too much? How do I ask for a meeting? How do I not sound transactional? How do I not impose? And then I want you all to leave here feeling like you've come up with a few extra frequent flyer miles. And we're going to talk about, how you follow up like a pro and play the long game on your relationships. I can't stress enough how much of an art this is. It's really not a science. And in that way, it's actually very similar to the practice of law itself, right? At Albany, you're either learning or you have learned, the ins and outs of contracts and torts and tax. But you know that in the real world, the application of these concepts is creative. And so I want to invite you, and not just give you permission, but frankly give you a mandate to take what you learn here today and make it your own. Because I can tell you as a coach, regardless of whether we're talking about networking or anything else, the more you stay true to yourself, the further you will go in your career and the happier you will be in your career. And so while most of this is subjective, of course, right? In law, we would talk about the exceptions too. There are a few things that I think are truly, truly objective. The first is what I call the paradox of networking itself, right? Which is that it's essential to our careers and yet best done when we do not need anything. This is the key for those of you who ranked yourselves higher on the scale or who are more advanced in your career. You know this is the key to building relationships in a way that isn't transactional, building relationships before you need anything from them. And for those of you who are a little newer to the game, I want you to think about each new introduction, conversation, connection, relationship as like a seed. It's not enough to plant the seed. You have to water the seed over time and give the seed sun and all sorts of nourishment because eventually you might want to harvest something from that seed. And ideally, you don't want to harvest something like this, right? That little seedling just sprouting. No. If possible, right, we want to cultivate and harvest things from our relationship when they're really in full bloom. Understanding that not every seed will bloom. Some we will cultivate early. Some will be totally duds and not take, and that's all part of the process. So let's talk a little bit about how we connect networking, relationship building, and our goals. And I'd actually love to hear from you. We're a small group. I'm going to invite you, just unmute yourself and blurt. If we have crosstalk, no big deal. That would happen in a conference room if we were all together. So feel free to unmute yourself or throw in the chat. Why do you think this is important? Or if you're an alum, how has this been important? Tying your networking, your relationships, and your goals together.
I can go first.
Sure.
So I don't know what this really would is answering the question, but I like this idea of building the relationships before you need them and also maintaining them when you don't. For myself, so I'm a 2018 graduate, and so far I've been in 2 different jobs, one at a law firm, one now clerking. But in terms of uh, it's funny because so I ranked myself as an 8. Like I feel comfortable with meeting new people, but actually then when you were talking about, okay, how do you build and then sustain those relationships, in a time when you don't need it, I'm like, oh, I think I'm actually more towards a 1 because I just don't know how to do it. Like it's not that I don't want to, or like I think I'd be bad at it. I'm just kind of like, how do you do it? So for example, um, and even right now, like I'm in the midst of, if you're looking for a new job and you want to connect with other people, really just hearing, like bouncing ideas off of them or hearing about their job, any guidance that they might have for me. And then say you then get a job, which is not with, A through, W that you connected with. But then how do you, like, you don't want to just like, okay, I got a new job, I don't need you. Because that's not how, at least I feel. It's like, I'm glad we made the connection and you want to continue having that connection and really just expanding your network. But it's awkward. I'm like, how do you then continue to, what do you like, hey, how is your, child doing type thing? I don't know. Is that what you do?
So we'll talk a little bit about that. One of the things I want to talk about today is how we level up our networking conversation so we're laying an even stronger foundation for the long-term relationship cultivation. But Charlotte, you raise a great question, which is like, well, how do I keep in touch? I got a new job. I'm actually going to give you one piece of advice that I think everyone can take, which is there's not enough good news in the world right now. And people really love to hear good things about other people. And so I would encourage you, right now it sounds like you're not looking for a new job. You're actually, if I recall from the conversation we were having before we went live, you're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of your job, which is fantastic, and congratulations to you on that. And this could be actually a great time to reach out to people and say, this year has gone by so quickly and so slowly at the same time in the pandemic. I wanted to share some great news with you, which is I'm coming up on the 1-year anniversary of this clerkship. And I want to thank you because that coffee we had 3 years ago, that conversation we had 6 months ago, that time that we got together when I was in 2L really made an impact on me. I know it's been a while. I think of you often. And you can either ask for time, or you could just ask them how they're doing, or that, acknowledge that it's been challenging with their kids and see how they are. And I just want to see like a +1. Like, has anyone here ever felt just like delighted when they get an email from someone that they haven't heard from in a while?
Yes.
Yeah, right? I see like thumbs up. It's that simple. It's that simple. And to Charlotte's point, that's why we want to make connections with people with whom it makes sense for us to stay in touch with, right? So we don't want to waste our time or theirs. That's why you don't have to have your goals figured out. But I just want to invite you to get curious about your goals. Don't check the box on networking. Don't be like, well, I should probably network with somebody from the USDA because that's a prestigious organization, even though I have no interest in agriculture or public policy. No, think about what you're really longing to learn. What are you excited about in law school? What are you excited about in your career? What articles do you find you're reading? Let that curiosity inform your networking strategy so that you don't waste their time or yours. We also, of course, want to be thoughtful about making asks inside of our network. I'm sure we've all asked people here for introductions in the past. And so we want to be good stewards of those relationships. Sometimes you meet someone, you get together with them, and you're like, oh, God, I have no interest in what they do. That's not a waste. That is great information. And so I really want to be crystal clear about that. And then lastly is that weak ties make for strong careers. So does anybody know what I mean when I talk about weak ties?
I do.
Yeah, go for it, Donna.
Okay. A lot of times when you're very close to people, you all share the same networks. But when you have looser ties with the weaker people in your network, they tend to have other nodes to speak of, and they can be really helpful sending new things your way.
Bingo. And the term comes from sociology. It's the idea, to Donna's point, that our networks are made up of strong ties and weak ties. To Donna's point, strong ties are the people with whom we share a deep personal affinity or connection. Friends, family. I think of these people as the people who will take you to the airport. These people are so important with your life, inside your life, but they are not going to have the biggest impact on our careers. Social science tells us that weak ties, people with whom we share a mutual professional affinity or connection, your boss from the internship, your friend from that clerkship, your roommate from your year in 1L. These are the keys to the introductions to the people you need to know and to the jobs that might not ever be posted on the internet. Weak ties also debunk the myth that networking is inherently transactional. The theory of weak ties is that these relationships aren't just okay and permitted, they are absolutely positively essential to advancing our career goals. And does anyone here have an example of a weak tie or a random connection that made a huge professional impact on their career? Or like a funny coincidence?
I have an example, but it's
Please.
actually not my career. This is Persia.
Hi.
About 10 years ago, a number of years ago, when I worked in the Career Center as assistant director, I was working with a recent graduate who was, she was aggressively pursuing her first job out of law school application. She kept sending a lot of resumes out, and the mailman, she was interested in working with the state of New York. And it just so happened the mailman, she went to check her mail and the mailman was delivering her mail. And he said to her, "Tracy, what are you doing here?" And he said that she told him she was looking for a job. She was interested in the state. It just so happened his wife worked in the HR office in a state agency that she was interested in. And that connection led her to her first job. And I thought that was just so interesting.
And Persia, you're hitting the nail on the head, which is weak ties are so important because the way we utilize them is by being clear about what our goals are. She wanted to work for the state. And because we're clear about our goals, we're able to talk about them with other people. I've never heard an example of the mailman. I might quote this, leaving this workshop. In follow-up, I'm giving you all a cheat sheet document of key concepts and takeaways. And there's an article there about weak ties. For those interested, you can read about the time that I did not have drinks with Yitzhak Perlman, the famous virtuoso, which is a story I don't want to tell right now because it just gets me upset. And it was the last time I said no to talking to a stranger. So I'll just tease that for now. And to Persia's point, it just really helps to get curious about our goals. And it's not just about what we want to do, it's about what we're longing to learn. And so I'm curious, and I'd love to see it in the chat. What are a few things that you find right now that you are longing to learn? And when's the last time you stopped to ask yourself that question? The coach in me can't resist asking that. Especially as women, we tend to be such doers. And sometimes we forget about who do we want to be? What do we want to learn? I love that. Mary said, crossword puzzles, texting. I find when it comes to our careers, there's usually three categories. It's usually roles, skills, or job functions. Specific organizations or firms, like what's it like to work at the ACLU? What's it like to work at the SEC? And life and career path. And so that's why if we're not going to networking events and turning on our cameras and participating in the breakouts, if we're not reaching out on LinkedIn, if we're not activating our weak ties, keeping in touch with them and asking who else they can introduce us to, and using our Albany connections, we can't find the answers to our questions. And so when you start to think about this as learning and developing, I find it reduces the stress around keeping it, making it feel transactional, whether you are building out your network for the first time, or Charlotte, I'm going to pick on you, not because it's you, but I think because you said something that a lot of people often feel, which is like, how do I actually stay in touch with people? And so I just want to encourage you one more time. Reach out. We're going to talk more about this. Go to conferences, put on your video camera, add people to your LinkedIn network. It's an opportunity to learn. And you're going to meet tons of people across your career who you're never going to get their help with something, but you actually might be that person for them. And so I also want to encourage you to think about how creating these connections can not just serve your own goals, but can help you advance the careers of other women and other attorneys in your field. Any questions before we start talking about some of the mechanics of this? And even just now, I'm just thinking so vividly about that Yitzhak Perlman story. It is like really one of those things that keeps me up at night. Let's demystify this a little bit, because as we start to clock all of those flying hours, when we enter the cockpit, it is actually like extremely overwhelming, right? And again, I'm Charlotte, I'm picking on you. There are parts you can feel super comfortable with. Charlotte's like, right, like I know how to take off. But I don't know how to land. Like, I don't know which dials and knobs do landing, and how do I, so for some of you, it's how do I get the meeting? For some of you, it's how do I follow up for the meeting? For some of you, it's what do I do in the meeting? And so we're going to talk a little bit about all of those different things today. I will say in a virtual world, this is the #1 shift I've observed. And it's not that people are less willing to network. It's about what used to intimidate people has changed. 12 months ago, if you ask me the #1 thing people tell me they're nervous about, it's about being in a room like this, breaking into a conversation with ease and grace, backing out of the conversation, the choreography of exchanging cards. As someone else put in the chat, there's a subtlety to all of that. There's not a lot of subtlety to this, right? Digital networking and relationship building, it feels awkward and uncomfortable. Like Zoom is awkward, people are busy, people with work, people who have kids are stretched so thin. And yet, if we're just sitting home alone in our house, there is literally nothing that we can do to grow our careers, connect with great people who are going to share our interests and share our goals, and pay that favor back to others. And so I want to talk about asking for the meeting and talk about some of these knobs and dials, because especially for the students who are joining us today, I find this is one of the biggest hurdles early to get it right. So if you ranked yourself as an 8 or a 10 in our chat, I'd actually love to hear from you. What are some of the things that you think make for effective outreach when you're reaching out to somebody?
I'll add one. Maybe
Please.
Showing that you don't have to do a full-blown, investigation on the person, but showing that it's like you've researched them out, like something about them, whether it was via the connection, like the person who made the connection with you, or if you're just kind of cold calling them. I know, like if say a student currently at the law school were to email me about something, it's nice when you see that they know what you're doing, because all it takes is one Google search and look at your LinkedIn and that's it. So it just shows some form of work on their end, and just it's nice acknowledgement.
Yeah. Great tip. Show them that you actually took 30 seconds to look them up, right? And make it personalized and tailored to them. Anyone else? Well, I'll share my tips. And true story, my husband once got a job from somebody he cold emailed on LinkedIn, asking for a coffee, meeting that person, keeping in touch for 12 months, and then got a job from that person. So if you're skeptical about if this stuff works, that is just one of the many stories that I could tell you. People really do respond if you can get their attention. So just a few quick things. I know this sounds so simple. You'd be shocked how many emails I see where people don't take the time to introduce themselves. And then it's just your random signature at the end of the email. The second is, Instead of asking if they have time to chat, I recommend asking for a meeting and providing specific times, dates, and places with an offer to work backwards from their availability. Please, instead of asking to pick their brain, if you've come with me here today, just give me a pledge, like a +1 in the chat. You pledge you will never ask someone to pick their brain again. Instead of asking to pick their brain, set the agenda. What is it that you actually want to discuss with them? You're not being rude. You're actually more likely to get the meeting that way. And then the last two, so simple, always say thank you. And this last one's a pro tip. I want you to think about your pleasantries, because if you've never spoken to someone and you start the email with, I hope this email finds you well, it can frankly ring really hollow, and they might not even keep reading. And so I want to encourage you to think about being thoughtful about the pleasantries. So in just a moment, Lima is going to tee us up, and we're going to go into breakout rooms of 2 to 3, students and alums. I'm going to ask faculty and staff to stay in the main room with me. And we are going to practice this right now and work together to level this up, because right now we don't have that many chance encounters. So if we want to get these meetings for the next 6 to 12 months, we have got to write great emails and great outreaches. So we are going to go into breakout rooms, do an exercise together, and when we come back, we're going to hear maybe 2 of them and do a little bit of stop, start, continue workshopping feedback. So Lima, if we could put the document in the chat, the instructions I'm going to walk you through are also going to be in a PDF so that when you go to the breakout room, you can see it. You are interested in learning more about public interest work. You notice a member of the alumni community works for the ACLU. So draft an email asking if they have time to speak. This is your scenario. Lima, if we could, oh, here we go. We have the PDF in there. And if we could send folks to breakout rooms, you're going to be there for about 9 or 10 minutes, and then we're going to bring you back. We'll give you a warning when you're about halfway through. And again, faculty and staff, please stay here with me. Alums and students, please go. Alums and students, please also use this as a quick opportunity to introduce yourselves and get to know each other. And so Lima, we're ready for those breakouts when you are.
Okay, Lima, I would go with probably 4 breakout rooms.
Okay.
I think that'll probably get, about 3 people in each room.
I am going to send the invites now.
Great. And again, if you're a faculty or a staff member, just click that Not Now button. I love what Diane just put in the chat. Vanita and I spent the time networking and punted on our assignment. That's great. That's wonderful. That's phenomenal. So we're not going to hear from Vanita and Diane, but I love that we did hear that they seized an opportunity to just get to know each other and do some in the moment networking. I would love to hear from a student. Is there any student who would be willing to read what your team came up with? Oh, Juliana.
Our group also kind of did the same. We chatted a bit and networked a little bit, but we were starting to get to the assignment, and we discussed maybe opening with a different pleasantry of how you know the person or what your connect or mutual connect would be, and just going from there. Someone suggested maybe just like outlining what you wanted to talk about, saying that you're not going to take not too much time, but like maybe if you have 20 minutes or something along those lines. So we were getting there, and I think what we came up with was pretty good.
I love that. And I'm going to give you, just based on what I've heard, some start, stop, continue. So I would say start making specific asks around a date. Do you have 20 minutes the week of February 15th or the week of February 22nd, perhaps? If not, and you're willing to talk to me, what are a few other times that work? Let's see, stop. It's hard to give you any stops because I didn't see it. And I didn't hear anything particularly glaring from what you shared. Not to say if I give another group stop that they did anything horribly wrong, just like a little harder to give stop without a specific example. And I do want to give you a few continues. Continue being thoughtful about your pleasantries. Continue being clear about the agenda and about the connection. So I love that you all took the time to network. And Juliana, if you don't mind, one more question. Besides the assignment, what's something new you learned about someone in your group?
I think I learned that Charlotte and Jessica were friends, potentially, and they knew each other pretty well. And I learned that Yuli does prepare to practice work, which is interesting and something I can appreciate. I try to do as many workshops as I can offered through the school, which have always been really helpful.
So maybe Juliana and Yuli are gonna chat after this. I love it. Juliana, thank you so much for participating. I really appreciate your contributions. Any other group, any other student want to share? All right, there'll be lots more time to basically hear from you all. I had a sample email that I wrote, and before I show it to you, two things I want to tell you. Number one, this is not gospel. What I love about Juliana is she threw out a bunch of suggestions that aren't even in my email. Hers aren't right and mine are wrong. Mine aren't right and hers are wrong. So this again is an art, not a science. Secondly is I am giving you a copy of this email in the takeaways document and encourage you to riff on it. If you like it, don't feel stressed out that you have to capture it in this moment. Hi, Jane. My name is Randy Braun, and I'm a student at Albany Law School who is planning to pursue a career in public interest law. I saw your name in our alumni directory and was hoping to learn more about your experiences at the ACLU and across the public interest sector more broadly. Would you be willing to have a virtual coffee one morning across the weeks of February 15th or 22nd? If these times or dates don't work well for you and you're open to connecting, I'm just looking at my other monitor, I'd also be happy to work backwards from your calendar. Thank you so much for considering, and I hope you're doing well during these challenging times. Pleasantries at the end, specific about why I wanted to talk to her, specific about when I was suggesting, told her I would meet on her timeline. This email isn't perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect email, but it really does read differently than, do you have some time? I'd love to pick your brain on doing public interest work. And in my experience, you're going to get a higher response rate if you use those 5 tips on the checklist. And again, you're going to get those in follow-up too. Now, sometimes you're going to hear nothing. You're going to hear crickets, and it's okay to follow up. Follow up in a week. If you follow up then and you still hear nothing, follow up in a month. It's okay to follow up with people. Sometimes you might get someone to respond to you and say, you know what, I'm really busy, but I'd be happy to chat with you in the spring. I want you to mark your calendar and talk to that person in the spring. And we're going to talk about how you stay on track about all of that. And then sometimes you're going to get the meeting, right? And you're going to be super excited until you get really overwhelmed because you aren't 100% sure what you want to talk about. And can I just get a +1 in the chat of someone who has gotten an email from someone saying they're willing to talk, and then like all of a sudden you get really, really nervous? Because I know this has been my experience. I put all my energy into like, should I email them? Should I not email them? Has it been too long or too short since we last spoke? And then I get the email back and I'm like, oh boy, I guess now we're getting on the phone. I have to prepare a meeting agenda. Anyone ever feel that way, or am I alone? Yeah, a thumbs up. Thank you, Juliana. I think you're the Greek chorus because I know that me and you aren't alone in having feeling that sometimes. And so I want to talk about setting up for a really successful meeting. I love this. And Uli just put this in the chat. It's the be careful what you wish for scenario. Uli, great bottom lining. You are 100% right about that. And again, it's like we know we're going to the meeting and it's like all new buttons and dials in the cockpit, right? And I'd love to hear again from some of my 8s, 9s, and 10s. What are some of the things, and Charlotte already mentioned one of them, which is doing some research on what they actually do. Earlier when we were speaking earlier, what are some things that set you up for success to prep a great networking conversation, whether it is your first conversation or I'm picking on Charlotte again, like Charlotte, she's sending an email because she wants to have a follow-up conversation with that person that she had coffee with 2 years ago during summer internship. What are some things that help us set up for successful meetings? Donna says, be ready to ask who else do you recommend I talk to? Anyone else have a list of questions? So I have 5 for you, and they're really, really basic. There's nothing here that's going to blow your mind. Here's where you get the mind-blowing results: consistency. Because if you consistently do all 5 of these things, more of your networking meetings will stick and they will be more impactful. That's where we want to move the dial here. So again, I just can't stress enough the sheer logistics of confirming your meetings with a calendar invitation and reconfirming an email 24 hours in advance. There's nothing more disappointing than getting so excited for your meeting and you just never sent the calendar invitation or a confirmation, and so it just wasn't on their radar. The second is the research piece, which almost every single one of you mentioned, right? Reviewing their LinkedIn, their website, their industry news. There is nothing more embarrassing than sitting down with someone and not realizing that their firm or their organization, or they just made a huge announcement yesterday. No one will tune out faster in this conversation with you and try and wrap it up sooner if they feel like you haven't put in the baseline effort. The third, and I think someone mentioned this earlier, is really thinking about how you leverage intelligence. So if you're doing networking right, to our conversation on week ties, you're asking your friends, your colleagues, your professors, your bosses to make introductions, right? Per what Donna threw in the chat. It's always asking people who else that you can connect to. And so it's not being a stalker. It's great form to follow up with Donna if she introduced me to Mary, to say, hey, Donna, I'm sitting down with Mary next Wednesday. What's something about her that I wouldn't read on the internet? And maybe Donna tells me that Mary loves dogs, and Mary, I'm going to totally make this up, breeds Shih Tzus in her spare time, right? Uh-oh, did we lose my screen? Can you guys see my screen, or is it black? Okay,
It's
great.
still there.
Excellent. It went away from me, but as long as you can see it, maybe my computer was like, I don't know, Randy, you didn't have a Shih Tzu graphic. We just went berserk on you. You know, it's not being a stalker to make that connection with Mary. It shows that we've put in the attention and the work. Of course, we want to prepare a good list of questions. And we're going to talk more about great question asking in a few minutes. But I want to highlight this for introverts and extroverts alike. Persia and I, from the Career Services Department, we're having a great conversation while you all were in breakout rooms about we have different levels of introverts and extroverts in the room. And for my introverts out there, I want to encourage you to think about questions as something that makes you feel comfortable, something that makes you feel like you're in control, something so that putting yourself out there doesn't feel as vulnerable or uncomfortable because you've got a list of questions and you know where you want to take people. For my extroverts like me, questions help people like us stay on track with an agenda that we want to have, understanding the conversation should be organic and fluid. You're doing it right if you've made a prepared list of questions and you maybe only get to half of them. That's doing it right, not doing it wrong. And then finally, I want to encourage you to spend some time thinking about your about me. What are some things you want to tell them that you're learning in law school, or that you about your career journey and your education so far? And part of the reason, just reading the chat, Joan said that you want to make sure that you don't monopolize the conversation. Part of the reason about having some of your about me prepared is so that you have a sense of what are maybe 2 or 3 things I want to share about myself, so that I'm having a conversation that feels like a dialogue without feeling like an interview and without feeling like I'm monopolizing the time. And for those of you who might be feeling a little uncomfortable about, well, what do I have to offer this person? I can't stress enough how fascinated people are by what you're doing in law school, truly. People really know that you are learning things that are at the cutting edge of the field. And I want to encourage you, when in doubt, say something about what you've learned in law school. Talk to them about your Albany experience. Again, we don't want to make the conversation all about us, but on the flip side, it is a two-way street. And so this really should be a conversation, a dialogue between two people getting to know each other, riffing off each other, and not like an interview. And so I'm curious, what else you all would add? And to some of the chat notes we've gotten in the chat, we're going to talk about structuring our time and great question asking in just a minute. Anything you would add? Anything you disagree with? Anything I missed? One thing I want to add here is that if you're doing it right, you're going to talk to the same people over and over again. And so it's really important that you take notes from all of your conversations because, again, to Charlotte's point, she remembered that that person had a kid. And it's warm and it's friendly to come back to them at the conversation you have 6 months or 3 years later and say, wow, the last time we talked, your daughter was in kindergarten. How's your family doing? It's warm, it's personal. Those are the little touches that make it feel like a conversation and not like an interview. I want to offer, I love this. Donna says, keep your notes on Outlook. We're going to talk about note taking too in a second. I want to offer one thing that's a little tactical, and then I want to do some workshopping with you on great questions. So I often get asked how to structure my time, especially I know we have some 8s and 10s in the group, but I know that we have especially some students who are in the 1 to 5. And I want to talk to them especially about structuring your time well, because it can be overwhelming. And I want to encourage you to use what I call the 10-70-20 rule for managing your time in a great networking conversation. 10-70-20. 10% of the time, so it's a 30-minute Zoom call, pleasantries. This is about building friendly rapport. This is about, oh, the last time that we talked, you mentioned that you were getting ready to go on a big trip to Italy. Where are you dreaming of going on vacation then when the pandemic is over? This is about making the little touches, showing some of the research that you've done. If you are in this room with me today, I forbid you to talk about the weather on a networking call. Please don't talk about the rain, the snow, the sunshine, unless it's some like super storm blockbuster event. I forbid you to talk about the weather. You want to warm up that rapport because we want to have the conversation itself, right? We want to spend 70% of our time doing the actual networking, building relationships through asking great questions. And I'm a firm believer that there are 2 types of questions. What do you think the difference is between an inquiry and an ask?
I feel like there's an action that happens after an ask, and rather an inquiry is kind of more open-ended, where they would provide more information where you can follow up.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And the only thing I would add to Allison's answer, I think of inquiries as questions where you're getting insights and learning about their experiences. This is about their role, the company, the firm, the organization, the sector, their journey. Asks are anything that you're asking for of them. So this might be feedback on your resume, career advice, introductions. And Donna put in a great question at the end, which is, always asking who else they can connect you to. That should always be in your asks column. Now, part of the reason I want to think about inquiries versus asks is because we know the paradox of relationship building is that it's essential to our careers, and yet it's best done when we don't need anything at all. And so I just want to encourage you, as you're thinking about prepping your questions, just check yourself. How many of my questions are inquiries and how many of them are asks? I want to be clear. It is okay. It is encouraged to make asks. It is encouraged to ask who else they can introduce you to. It is encouraged to ask them for advice, especially if you're sitting down with them and they're in a field or have paved a path that you wish to follow. Don't lose the opportunity to ask it, but you do warm up those asks by asking great inquiries. And so I want to play a little bit of a game with you. as it pertains to our inquiries, and I want to think about how we can level up our questions. And so I'm going to ask you, let's break a Zoom rule. Unless you have a screaming child or a dog or major construction behind you, feel free to take yourself off mute. It's okay if we get crosstalk, just like we would in a room. We're going to go through 4 questions. And whether this is your first time meeting them, or this is what I would call like a relationship building question where you're catching up, let's think about how we can take some of these questions from just okay to great. So this is a just okay networking question. How long have you been there? How do we make this great?
What's kept you at the firm for 10 years?
Great. I love it. What else? It's a yes and, not that your answer was wrong.
What was your favorite thing that you did in law school?
That's another great question. I also have, how has the role or firm changed since you've been here? How long have you been there? You can find on LinkedIn. How has the role or firm changed since you've been here? Is something that you can only hear in a conversation. Here's one of my favorite questions to ask at a conference, virtual or in person. This is the just okay version of it. What do you do? How do we level that question up to be great?
Maybe ask what their favorite part of their job is.
That would be a great question. And as it pertains to being at a conference or an event particularly, I like this one. What brought you here today?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question.
You will find out. Yeah, thank you. You will find out immediately what they do. Usually they'll say, oh, I'm a partner at so-and-so law firm and my colleague is speaking on the tax panel at 12 o'clock. That's your opening. 2 more questions. What's the best part of your job? That's a pretty okay question. Nothing wrong with any of the just okays I've shown you. Who wants to take a stab at making this one great? I have, what's the most fulfilling part of your job? And why I like this question is because if you use the word fulfilling, they will volunteer the good, bad, and the ugly. You'll hear an answer like this is like, God, that's such a good question. You know, I have to tell you the hours are exhausting, but it's my people, the practice area, the clients, the projects, insert that here, that make it worth it. It's a great opportunity to actually invite them to tell you about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And if our networking is tied to our goals, especially early in our careers, we want as much good information as possible. And then lastly, this is still an okay question, but a lot of it you can find on the internet. What was your career path like? You have them in a Zoom for 30 minutes. How do you all want to level this up to great? Last chance. Would love to hear from someone who hasn't participated. What moment in your career was a game changer for you? I have people told me that that question gives them chills because nobody has ever stopped to ask it. And it's such a simple question. It's such a great question to ask in networking, especially the first time you meet someone. What moment was a game changer for you? That's where you're going to really, leveling up these questions, get insights. And I'm curious for you all. Diane says she's looking forward to the cheat sheet. Diane, all these questions are on the cheat sheet, I promise. What are a few themes that you all heard between the just okay and the just okay versus the great questions? What made the great questions great?
They were more thoughtful.
They're more specific.
Thoughtful, specific. There was emotion I'm seeing in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
These questions were also, I'll just throw out a few other descriptors, open-ended, curious, and even though I read them to you from a PowerPoint slide, didn't they kind of feel tailored? Like if you were to ask that, don't you think they would land feeling tailored? Great questions are how you build great relationships in those meetings. It makes people feel like you're invested in them and they're going to invest in you. And the more you spend time asking great inquiry questions like the ones we just brainstormed, the warmer people are to receive your asks. So I want to give you permission. Do ask for resume feedback and advice. Do leave every single conversation asking if they have advice on anyone you can introduce them to. If you submitted a summer application to their firm or their organization and you have them on the phone, ask if they'd be willing to flag it. Of course, don't throw away that shot. However, we just want to be thoughtful about our asks, right? We don't want to ask too many. We want to ask at the end of the conversation. And I do, especially with women, feel like I have to give this warning because it's something that I see with women who are just incredibly accomplished in their career, where these good girl habits are very ingrained. There's a tendency to please or not impose or not be rude or not be transactional. And I want to be clear. We want to be thoughtful about not making too many asks. We want to be thoughtful about not leading the conversations with asks. But if you're not asking for the introduction or how to connect the dots on their advice and something you're thinking about, you're missing an opportunity because somebody else is. And so if you are going to make an ask, just be polite, concise, and direct, right? You're wasting the ask if you say, Mary, if it wouldn't be too much trouble, would you mind maybe if it's okay passing my resume along if you know who the person is? That's a wasted ask. Whereas, Mary, it's been such a wonderful conversation with you. I admit I'm leaving here feeling so excited about this application that I submitted for the summer program. Would you be willing to pass along my resume? And you ask us a question and they can say yes or no. I would say you really get one ask per conversation, depending on how big the ask is. And I always like to say save it for the end. To that end, I will ask you all, what's the most important question that you should ask them? How can I be helpful to you? Always. And sometimes I hear from students, I can't be helpful to them for anything right now. Today maybe you can't help them with something professionally, but just asking the question shows that you care. Sometimes I've had people come back to me and say, I talked at the beginning about how I like to cook, and then at the end when I asked how I could be helpful, they asked me to send them a recipe. It's an actual thing that someone came back to me and told me. And so it just reminds us that this really is a two-way street. And that's how we want to close on the last 20%, right? Confirming any follow-up steps, asking if you can be helpful for them, and saving any asks for the last part of the conversation. The last little bit that we're going to talk about before we move to Q&A is thinking about following up and playing the long game. Any questions about, we spent a lot of our time talking about the mechanics, and that's purposeful because especially earlier in your career, I want you to feel confident having those conversations so that you can follow up and you have a good foundation for playing the long game. Any questions before we wrap up with a few tips for playing the long game and opening up to more Q&A from you? All right, we'll keep on trucking. Just quickly, again, just evergreen for following up, sending a thank you note, connecting on LinkedIn or any other kind of conference or alumni platforms, and keeping in touch. Now, we had a few people in the chat saying, take notes in Outlook, take notes, follow up, calendar invites. I am leaving you all here today with this document. Clear, art, not science, so if this doesn't resonate with you, don't use it. But many of you are here because you're thinking about how to get more structured around your networking and your relationship building. And I want to encourage you all to just keep a list of these people. Who are they? Why are you talking to them? And again, every single time you're looking at this list, you are connecting your relationship building and your goals. When are you reaching out to them? When again will you reach out to them? And just keeping any notes. It's so simple. Start with a list and come back and visit this list from time to time. And this document is going to be fillable, and each one of you is going to get a copy of it today. As we talk about, yeah, Charlotte, yeah.
Sorry, I just had two questions. So one
Please.
would be, because also in the comments, but then also what we're saying in terms of,
Yeah.
say for a handwritten note, you know, a thank you note. I've found myself within the past few years, especially with email, and I've been torn with an email. It's so speedy. So if you have, you know, a conversation with them, it's nice, even if it's just within a few hours or at least 24 hours to follow up quickly. Whereas when you're writing a handwritten note, I sometimes, I don't know, unless you put it in that day or the next, even though it might be a few days delayed. I'm just curious what you think is the best approach for that. And if it's always necessary to do the handwritten note, if it, or also even where to send it, like, do you send it to, you know, their office and then figuring that out? And then just before I forget, and then the second question was kind of going back to the last 20% of saying, how can I be helpful to you? I definitely see how that's great. And I'm just being honest with myself that when I think of saying that, I'm like, I don't see myself saying that to a lot of people that I speak to, because mostly just because I guess the word would be intimidated, or would feel like I sound silly. Like, well, how can I, like you said, it's like, how can I help you? Like, I'm asking you for help or advice. And why would you need advice from me, who's like asking you type thing? So maybe just figuring out a way to get more comfortable, I guess, with that, because I think it's a great point and definitely something to do, but I'm just curious, you know.
So I'll answer both questions. I keep looking over here because I'm sitting here at my desk in my office, and here are my thank you notes, right? And I got like a little stamp that does my address, and I got my stamps over there. I really do believe in 24 hours, like just even a quick email. Thanks again for your time today. It was so wonderful. And just mentioning something specific that you talked about. And then if you want to send a handwritten note, I think you can also send that in follow-up. I find the rule of thumb to be it's hard to bank on a handwritten note in the pandemic, especially when the mail is going really slow and you don't know where people are living, if they've like decamped to Maine. And so I would make it a yes and. Email, and if you want to send a handwritten note, you can. I know every time I receive them, I'm blown away. And so I think it always is a nice gesture, but sometimes you don't have their address and it would be awkward to ask. So like it's also not required. Charlotte, I'm actually going to challenge you to think about the how can I help you question, not from a place of doing, but from a place of service. And I have given this challenge to other women to just ask the question and phrase it like this. You have been so generous with your time. Is there anything I can do to be helpful for you? 9 out of 10 times, especially earlier in your career, you will get an answer like this. You know, I can't think of anything, Charlotte, but I really appreciate that you took the time to ask me that question. It's really more about the partnership and a very implicit way to show value than it is about the expectation that you're actually going to do that. And you'd actually be shocked. You would actually be shocked. People might actually take you up on it. You know, actually, I'd love to lecture at Albany. Could you put me in touch with the right people in your alumni network? You know, that's something I could see happening. Any other questions? And we're going to have some more Q&A at the end too, but anyone who has questions about anything else that we've covered so far?
I'd like to just, this is Joan Cohout. I'd like to just mention, if you are networking with a woman of a certain age, and I'll just pick arbitrarily, 50 or over, send that handwritten note. And if you don't know how to write a good note, learn. There are ways to do that. Ask your mother, ask your aunt, look it up on the internet. It will make a difference. Maybe if the woman is a little bit younger, it may not be so determinative, but I like to see that somebody was thoughtful enough to send me a written note.
I agree, Joan. Whenever I get a handwritten note in the mail, I'm like, it's touching. It's honestly like more touching for me than when someone sends me flowers. And it does go a long way. Remember, this is really all about consistency. And so I want to encourage you, please go to virtual conferences. If you're waiting to start networking and meeting new people until the pandemic is over, you're wasting opportunities, because the people who are showing up at these things are eager to talk to you. I was just talking the other day to a woman. She's a partner track counsel at a big law firm, and she confided in me. She was like, I seriously have not been to a conference in about a year, and I know it's just this thing that I have to do, and I just really don't want to because I'm zoomed out. And she had one coming up. I was like, go, humor me, report back. I got a text message from her the other day. That was the best hour that I spent. She just went in, came in for the networking breaks, parachuted back out to a deadline that she had. Please go. Please turn on your video camera. Follow up with people. And to that end, I want to put in a huge plug for LinkedIn. We could do a whole nother session on just using LinkedIn well. Using your LinkedIn is not bragging. It is the lowest hanging fruit for keeping in touch with people. It is the democratization of thought leadership. Everyone on LinkedIn gets to have an opinion. Post an article you're reading. Post an article you're interested in. Just stay top of mind by liking and commenting things from other people. Add people smartly to your network with little personalized invitations. LinkedIn is the lowest hanging fruit, and if you're not on it daily with a fully done profile and putting up content regularly, I'm talking like a picture and a summary and content once a week, you are missing an opportunity to stay top of mind and to learn new things and have new opportunities to reach out to people. And again, to Charlotte's point, it's a very easy reach out if I'm following on LinkedIn and I see that this person posted an article to say, hey, your article on, I don't know, the new laws around estate tax caught my eye. Would you be willing to catch up sometime? It's been a while since we chat. I'd like to discuss blah, 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 right? Go back to that list. Big plug for LinkedIn. I'm going to take your questions, so feel free to throw your hand up for a hand raise or throw them in the chat, but I just want to leave you with one final thought. And it comes from my friend and colleague, Meredith Feynman, who published this book, Brag Better, over the summer. This is also on your takeaways document, and I can't recommend this book highly enough. Meredith does not pay me to say that. It's a 300-page book that I read in 36 hours. I should mention I'm a mom of 2 under 5, so like I really had to like the book to be that committed. And I want to just leave you with this quote from Meredith, and it's this. Many of us, the qualified quiet, have done the work but don't know how to share it. We need a place to begin. You likely prefer to put your head down and just do good work. Bragging to propel your career is essential, difficult work. You are sabotaging yourself by not talking about your accomplishments. People don't know what you've done until you tell them. So let's get strategically loud. I want to encourage you to post on LinkedIn. I want to encourage you to reach out and share good news. I want to encourage you to have conversations with people in your network and make them conversations, not interviews. You have something to offer. And I just want to leave you with that. I'm going to take Yuli's question in a second. Feel free to screenshot this. Mary's going to send my contact information. For those of you who connected with me on LinkedIn after our last session, you know I post lots of free articles. I host lots of free events. Something Major is dedicated to advancing women leaders. And so when you go on my website, you are not going to see any pitch for my services. You're going to see tons of free articles and free events, because it is so important that as women, we share information and ideas. And I hope to see you at a Something Major event soon, hopefully at an Albany event soon. And now I'm going to take my screen share down. And I'm going to start taking your Q&A. Uli, you go first. And am I pronouncing your name correctly?
It's actually Yuli, but you were close enough. That was fine. I have a question. I'm usually pretty decent actually at the talking to strangers part, and I love talking to strangers, even though we haven't been able to do so much of that in the last year. And even the initial follow-up isn't too much of a problem, but I realize after listening to you that there are quite a few people who I've lost touch with, not because of the pandemic, that people I had probably good conversations with or good, initial, experiences with, who I may have not been in contact with in years. Is there any nice, polite, not weird way to get back in touch with somebody like that? And it's not, unfortunately, it's not a situation where I can say, like, we both have children in the same age. Oh, they must be getting, old enough to go to college now or something like that. Nothing like that applies. So do you have any suggestions for how to try to rekindle that kind of networking relationship without it sounding too much like, uh-oh, what does she want from me?
It is I get this question all the time, and it is truly so simple. I can't challenge you enough to write one of those emails today. And there's no excuses. There's no preamble. It's just, I'm going to pick on Mary because she's in the center of my screen. It's, hi, Mary. You crossed my mind today. I was thinking about how lovely it was that time we got coffee a few years ago, and I just wanted to reach out to see how you're doing. Maybe share a little bit about what's going on in your world, and then, if you want to make an ask to talk to them again, do it at the end. I'm curious, has anyone received an email like this in the last year from someone like, hey, you were on my mind? Has anyone ever received an email like this? Yes. And Persia, what is it like when you get that email?
It's just, I want to schedule that phone appointment right away because it changed my day. I recently had a student from Siena College who I met 2 years ago who was thinking about law school. And we've been in touch, and he called me just out of the blue, shot me an email and said, can I talk to you for a second? And, I stopped everything just to have that conversation. I thought it was just awesome. So it's all positive.
Absolutely. There's no tricks. There's no magic formula. It is so simple. It really is just sending someone an email. And the pandemic now more than, that's evergreen advice, but in the pandemic, I think it really means something to people, which is, you crossed my mind and I just wanted to say hi and see how you're doing. And sometimes another thing that I'll do is I've called people, and you'd be shocked. People answer. And I just get on the phone. I would just be like, I think it's been a few years since we spoke, but I got this random, I saw this thing and it reminded me of you. And I thought I would just call and say hi. I'm sure you only have 5 minutes. I have 5 minutes. I just really recommend reaching out. And I would love if you would shoot an email today, if I could challenge you.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to get my contact information. Send me an email. I want to hear how it went.
Okay. No, I can see that. I'm already thinking of ways this could work. So, yeah, I think honestly, I thought of you, or you crossed my mind, works better from a woman to another woman than, a woman to somebody in a sort of relationship, a man in a work relationship or something like that. But yeah, I can think of something. I'll definitely, in fact, I'm going to make it a challenge to try to do this at least, well, once a month sounds so small, but I'm going to, that's still more than I was doing last year. So I'm going to try to do that on a regular basis.
It's as though you read my mind, which was, I want to encourage you and everyone else who's listening, set up some KPIs for yourself, some key performance indicators. Are you going to send one networking email a week? Are you going to do one a month if maybe you're in a different phase of your career? Are you going to do one a day because you're actively job searching? I'm a huge believer, and we talked about this last time for those of you who came to my Beating Burnout and Reclaiming Time session. It's all about seizing micro moments for macro impact. So really just thinking about what is the smallest thing that you can do, and just I thought of you. And by the way, I think you can send this to a man. I think it's totally okay with like a subject line, reconnecting, to send an email and just be like, I don't know why it crossed my mind, but I was thinking about that conversation we had 3 years ago at that conference and just wanted to reach out and say hello, hear how you're doing. I don't think there's anything there that is off limits. And so I think you know yourself and your relationships best, but I do just want to put that out to the group as a different perspective. Okay. We probably have time for 1 or 2 more questions if anybody else has them. Who has a question that they're really shy to ask in front of everyone? If you send it to me privately, I'll read it anonymously. And while we're waiting for that to come in, I would actually love to hear from you in the chat. What's one thing that is new that you're taking away from today? It was either a new concept or it's something you're newly going to implement. What is one thing? You gave up 90 minutes of your day to hang out with me, and it's been a blast for me. But as we bring it to a close, I want to hear from you. What is one thing that you are going to do or that you learned today that you are going to use to build your relationships and network like a pro, to get those flying hours in? Persia says inquiry versus ask. Jessica says to be thoughtful about how I phrase questions. Right, that was the just okay versus great questions. Allison says asking what I can do for them. Vanita says asking how I can be helpful. Yuli says the language that I suggested for reconnecting. Mary says continuing to build my weak connections. This is great. Juliana says how to form better pleasantries. It's not on your takeaways document, but there is a great New York Times article. If some of you do subscribe to my newsletter from our first session, that's going to be in my February newsletter. There was a great op-ed about why we should just kill I hope you're doing well as the opening to any email. So definitely either Google that article, or those of you who do subscribe to my newsletter will see that. You know, Mary, I'm going to pass it to you to close us up. One of the things that I always really look for is that everyone walks away with something different. And so my hope as we close this out is that each one of you, whether you came in here as an 8 and you feel a little bit more comfortable to take it to a 9, or you came here as a 1 and you're leaving a 2 or a 3, I hope that each one of you is leaving with something really tactical today, because relationships and networking can be pretty overwhelming at times, but they can also be really game-changing, really gratifying, really fulfilling in the most surprising ways. So my big longing for you all is that you just continue to put yourself out there in ways that are comfortable, in ways that connect you to others and connect you to your goals. And Mary, I just want to say thank you again and pass it back over to you to close us out this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Randy. It is always a pleasure. And I think that I know I learned a lot. I hope our students and our alumni enjoyed the session with you, and we hope to see you back again really soon. And I just want to give a plug to Randy's newsletter because I love it. I look forward to getting that in my email. And so if you haven't subscribed yet, it's well worth it. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, just housekeeping, we're going to use your email addresses from our Zoom participant list, and we're going to send you the handouts that Randy and cheat sheet that Randy mentioned here today. All right. So Randy, thank you so much for your time and your expertise, and we look forward to seeing you soon. And thank you, everybody.
Such a pleasure.
Thanks
Bye now.
very
Thanks,
much.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.